account with leading the technology and innovation at Clara.io, our spokesperson is responsible for guiding the development and delivery of solutions across ALM, DevOps, and cloud domains using Clara as the underlying platform. He has over 18 years of rich experience in software product development, R&D, cloud architecture, cloud DevOps, and designing cloud solutions for modern data platforms. In the DOIs, he's going to walk us through some of the best practices to reduce multi-cloud cost management for enterprises and share his deep insights in his session. Everybody, we bring to you Mr. Mustufa Batterywala.
Hi everyone, welcome to this DevOps India Summit and to this session on multi-cloud cost management. I'm very excited to be here and talk to you about one of the challenges which more and more enterprises are facing. So managing cloud cost is a challenge, but to add, if there are multiple clouds, the challenge becomes multifold. In this session, we are going to see and talk about some of the practices and how we have solved these challenges in some of the engagements we have worked with. Now, before we move ahead, let me quickly introduce myself. So my name is Mustufa Batterywala, and I'm working with Clara as Director of Technology, responsible for product innovation in the areas of cloud, DevOps, and containerization. I have more than 18 years of experience and I've worked in the DevOps domain for past 8 to 10 years. I've been involved in complex cloud migrations, setting up DevOps, DevSecOps processes from scratch in most of the enterprises across the globe. Now, what we have in the session for today, we'll briefly talk about what's the current state of cloud with respect to spend, what are the challenges, and why cost management is a challenge in cloud, why organizations are struggling with that. How do we address those challenges? What could be a systematic approach? And then I'll walk you through a customer success story where we will share some of the practices and solutions we use that help us to address the cost challenge in a large enterprise. Cloud is a no-brainer in today's organizations, big and small, across domains are racing towards adopting cloud. And there are various reasons. They want to reduce the cost. They want to build newer offerings for their customers. A lot of surveys suggest that cloud consumption would be a multi-billion dollar market, right? It would reach to around $500 billion this year. That's a whopping number. The cloud budget is part of each and every IT team in today's world. But is the cloud cost being used effectively? Are the teams happy the way they are managing the cost? The answer is probably not. Most of the cloud projects are running over budget. With the increase in cloud spend, they expect that the budget will be further over-allocated. That means there is some challenge where people are not able to contain cloud costs. The things are fine when we start small, when we are doing certain POCs, pilot, a single use case goes into the cloud. The moment scales, the problem aggravates. A lot of enterprise actually realize that almost 30% of their cloud cost is wasted. That means if they would have followed some of the best practices, they would be very proactive in managing costs, that would have been avoided. And if we think about the monthly bills of millions and billions of dollars, this 20 to 30% amount is a significant amount to be saved. Cloud cost is part of each and every discussions, right? From executives to operations team to the teams who are using that. Hence, we can see that optimizing cloud, reducing the cloud bill, and optimizing the resources is at the top agenda for each and every enterprise. Everyone wants to save money on the cloud. But before we get into details that how do we do that, let's understand that why this is a challenge, why teams are not able to contain the. Now, when you start, each and every cloud provider has their own billing and invoice mechanism. You get to know what you're spending on cloud, which services are being used. That gives you enough clarity. Then why cost management is a challenge? Because all this is at centralized monitoring. Mostly the finance teams or the IT teams are controlling the cloud costs. They are managing the budgets and they are giving the invoices. But the actual users are the development teams who are using the cloud, who are creating resources in the cloud. And they don't have any clue about what the cost is because of the work they are doing. Now that brings a gap. There is accountability missing in who is using the cloud versus who is managing it. The other important thing is the access to these dev teams doesn't exist. If I am using certain services which are costly, I would never know. The teams would create resources and they would leave it running and they would keep on using a day in, day out, because they are not concerned, not focused at how that will add to the overall cost. There is no way where we can go ahead and make the teams accountable and say that these resources are logged by these people in your team, so you have to bear the cost. The chargeback mechanism doesn't exist. Also, the current breed of tools are reactive in nature. You get to know your billing at the month end, but the damage has already been done. We lack ability to detect if certain anomalies exist on a daily basis. It would have been much better if I come to know that, okay, my daily cost is X. The next day it becomes 2x, that means certain thing is wrong, rather than waiting after 15 days and that becomes 15x the cost. We need to have some forecasting capabilities where we can forecast what's the usage, and that will help the teams to create and formalize budget strategies for different. Now, working with a lot of big enterprises, and we work with customers who have millions and millions of dollars as their monthly cloud budgets, we realized these challenges and we came up with a systematic approach on how we can address these challenges and help teams save some of the valuable money. Now, let's look at how do we approach these challenges. It's an incremental approach, right? Where we start with an assess phase, where we start looking at the on the ground situation. What's happening on the ground, where my money is getting spent, who is using, which are the services which are being used, which are the regions which teams are using most of the resources. Once we come up with this analysis and have data, that will help us to make some intelligent decisions on how we can optimize the resources. Can it be a case that teams can share the environment, share the resources? Are we missing on some of the important monitoring aspects that can help us identify some of the idle resources? And how do we establish a governance platform where we can make the teams accountable and charge back them based on the usage? That leads us to the optimization phase, where we start thinking about all these things and place controls in this. Once we have the controls in place, the teams are self-empowered and become self-managed to manage the cost. The cost becomes a critical point of discussion during the design and architectural phase. Cost optimization is a focus area. It is not left towards the end. It is all best practices are followed, right from the review of design to the selection of technology and the tools. At the same time, a lot of anomaly detection rules are set up so that we catch the errors, we catch the issues as early as possible. And this approach is cyclic. We keep on optimizing, we would identify newer areas to look into, and then we keep on optimizing those as well. So it becomes a cyclic process. Newer teams will be onboarded, newer services will be used. So we have to keep following the entire process till we are using the cloud and we become self-managed on the. Now, let me walk you through a real experience where we got similar challenges and we were able to resolve and put a similar approach in place. I'll talk about some of the practices we use, some of the tools, and some of the solutions we developed to kind of address this multi-cloud challenge, the cost management. We worked with a customer, a US-based large customer in the financial domain, right, who had kind of become big, acquiring multiple companies. So because of this acquisition, there were different clouds that were being used. They were using AWS, they were using Azure, they were using Google. Now, one of the things that they wanted us was they wanted to create a single data platform where they could onboard a lot of their on-premise data sources, bring everything into the cloud, and then provide a single interface for different teams to develop multiple use cases. As people do, right? We started small. We did a small POC. We did one use case. And we started with a smaller footprint in the cloud. It was a success. It was appreciated by senior executives. It was rolled out to the entire organization. And that's where we started facing issue, which started with a few GBs of data. Soon it got into terabytes of data. We started with one data source migration. It started eventually 500 plus data sources. That's where we started feeling the pressure on the cost side. We were almost losing the benefit of the cloud because the cost bills were actually going into hundreds and thousands of dollars. On top of that, there were multiple discrete applications who were consuming the data and who are running on different clouds. So we don't know who is using the data and where these applications are. We tried to use all different cloud solutions, the monthly invoice, the email alerts, but it couldn't help. They were all discrete in nature. We were not not able to map the data from AWS to Azure or to GCP. At the same time, we were not able to map who is using. There are hundreds of teams developing use cases, bringing their data, and we would never know that, okay, how to charge those teams. A team bringing a small amount of data or a team bringing a large amount of data, we were not able to distinguish. At the same time, teams were lacking the visibility that what are the resources they are using, what's the cost coming because of the resources. So the entire focus was just on monitoring, generating reports, looking at the billing data, but the optimization was far left behind. Now, how did we address these challenges? We followed a shift left approach where the cost monitoring became a cost optimization. Rather than waiting for the operations team to come up with a monthly data and cost alerts, we integrated the entire cost tracking into the development lifecycle. While we were developing new use cases, we were brainstorming on the resources required. Cost was one of the factors that were discussed. Why do we need these kind of machines? How can we optimize the resources? Can we share the resources with different teams? The entire cost module had to be shared with the development team so they know if they are doing any development, what is the cost and what is the cost of promoting those changes into stage and production. One of the important pieces of this entire solution was how do we aggregate data across all different clouds and how do we create a single visual dashboard where we can see what is the spend across different clouds. At the same time, these dashboards can be consumed by executives to plan the budgets and to allocate budgets to different teams. We wanted to compare usage across teams, across accounts. So we needed that flexibility as well. And then not just monitoring, but how do we identify that what is contributing to the cost? If we know if we are increasing our cost, so it is increasing by few percentage, 10, 20%. But why? What is contributing to that? Which are the services? Which are the use cases? So the focus was to address the optimization part rather than just give the numbers and do some analysis around. This is what we came up with. On the left-hand side, you would see that all the possible clouds we were using, we are able to pull the entire cost metrics from each of these clouds. And each of these clouds has a different means of providing the data. If you look at AWS, the data is not directly available. We need to generate the cost and usage reports, put it into S3 buckets, put the S3 data into Athena, and then we are able to query from Athena and get all the raw data. If you look at Azure provides everything over the API. GCP, again, it doesn't directly provide the access. You have to pull data into a data warehouse, which is BigQuery. And then from BigQuery, you have to query. So created a custom solution, which helped us to get data from all these three clouds. We had to develop mechanism to fetch data from all the three, all the raw data that was fetched. And then with all this raw data, we created a lot of transformations and aggregations to create different kinds of dashboards and trends that can be consumed by different teams, managers, as well as executives. Some of the trends which we thought the daily spend, the monthly spend, the cost-based services, cost-based regions, and we'll see some of them in detail in the subsequent slides. Another thing that we did is that we started doing a lot of pattern analysis. What's the cost? What's the month-on-month cost? Which services are consuming? At what time of the week? At what point of the day the costs are higher? And we started developing some patterns that can help us detect anomaly in the data. So rather than waiting for surprises till the month end, we were able to identify it early. And what we did is, one of the other unique thing that we did is that we coupled all these events with notifications that could raise, apart from email, it could raise alerts to Slack channels. It could raise issues in Jira or ServiceNow. So any event that gets triggered, it doesn't get lost in the emails. It creates external incidents that are tracked and resolved by different teams. That it helps us to manage the alerts, why the alert was raised, what was done, the entire root cause analysis for that. That helped us to improve our algorithms to predict and forecast usage. At the same time, all these events were actually integrated with automated workflow systems, where based on certain events, we could take some corrective actions. For example, we could stop some of the resources which are running for a longer time and nobody is using them. So rather than going to a different solution, creating and manually shutting down an instance or something, we integrated all those things with the central solution itself. Not only it helps us to save time, but it helps us to manage a complex environment where hundreds of different resources are getting created in a day. Let's talk about some of the details, right, on the process side as well as some of the practices we follow. Since we wanted to make sure that we know which teams are using which resources, how they are contributing to the overall cost, we came up with a tagging policy and a compliance monitoring around. Tags were made mandatory for the team. They have to mention the username, the business unit, the team name, so that we know based on the tags we are able to distribute the cost to those teams. We were able to create compliance dashboards and billing dashboards based on the tax values. That also helped us to allocate budget to teams. So if some teams are actually violating the budgets, we can go ahead and take some actions. Maybe we can even disable the access for them as well. We were able to distribute budgets evenly across teams based on their usage. So some teams working on microservices, or some teams working on compute services or AI/ML services where they might need a higher budget. Integrated a lot of automated monitoring, where if there are any resources running, it could be an EC2 instance, it could be EBS volumes which are not being used, or it could be EMR clusters which are used for data processing. These are heavy resources. If they are running but no job runs on them, they are idle. We can actually detect and we can take some corrective actions. We also use the historical data to identify that what is the peak usage of the system. Based on that, we were able to take actions where we were able to bring down the capacity during the off hours. That helps us to save significant amount of money. We automated the data archival, where if the data is not in use, we can move it to a lower tier storage. Now, let's look at some of the data points that we captured and what kind of metrics we were able to. So this is the multi-cloud dashboard we created. You can see data coming from all different clouds. Which cloud is the highest contributor? What are the different regions and services? One of the benefits we got from this is that a lot of different teams were using different regions. Our cost was distributed across regions. You were able to consolidate to use the common region. That way, resource sharing could increase. If you look at the tags, right? So initially, teams were not using tags. Almost 90% of the cost was because of untagged resources. That's where the tagging policy came in, and the aim was to bring this compliance to close to 95%. Once we drill down into a specific cloud, right? So from an executive perspective, it's fine, but what's happening within a single cloud? So that's where we get into a specific cloud dashboard. We're able to see details from a cloud provider. So what are my costliest services? Which are my regions which are being used? Which users are using my resources? You can see the budgeted allocation versus my spend. And what is the trend of top services on a month-on-month basis? So if my trend varies every time there are different services, it means that my technology stack is still not mature. There is a lot of experimentation and R&D that is being done. And since we know mostly the compute instances are the ones which takes a lot of the cost. So we know that, okay, what in compute instances are the instances which are running, or there are volumes lying unused that are contributing to the overall system. Once we get into the further details, how do we optimize, right? So till now, we have been looking at the metrics which are able to give us some data points, right? So they are giving us data awareness, some sort of intelligence. But how do we get an actionable information? So that's where we created this details view, where for a specific service, we drill down into that, okay, which operations are contributing to the cost and which resources. So we can clearly see if my compute instances are taking, then it is not just the instances which are running, but maybe there are some NAT gateway which were created, nobody is using, but they are costing. Or there are some volumes which are lying unused. They are not attached to any instances, but nobody removes them. Or let's say if I'm using my storage buckets. So data is increasing in my buckets. Nobody is accessing it. I'm paying the cost for the storage. I can move them easily to the archive storage because nobody is reading that data. It is mostly for the compliance that I'm storing. So those sort of insights started appearing before us. And that's where it led us to the optimization. As we talked about the tag compliance, you can see that with this, we were able to know, right? So you can see on the second one, the tag compliance for, let's say, GCP is even the non-tag compliance is 66%. That's what I should say, right? So they don't have any tags. That's a very bad situation from a best practices perspective. At the same time, if you look at on the AWS data on the left side, just 14%. Though it is still better, right? So we are able to at least go and say that which teams are using which resources. We can take some actions on them. Now, what did we achieve, right, out of all creating a solution and creating a custom solution for managing, doing all the process changes? It helped us to increase the visibility. Now, the major benefit was that we were able to save almost $50,000 on a month-on-month basis, on a quarter basis. This is a huge money. This money was actually used in developing more and more use cases. So with the same budget, we were actually able to run almost 20-30% more use cases. So that's a decent achievement. It also helped everyone to see all the data at one place. So we talked about data platforms. We are bringing all the data, but actually we created a data platform for the cloud cost as well. Everything is coming. The executives can see and they can take decisions whether if the GCP usage is quite low, only one of the units, it makes sense to move that unit to AWS and get rid of the entire cloud. We don't need spend into the management of the additional cloud. Quick insights on the basis of regions, services, tags, automated workflow, so that actually reduce a lot of burden on the operations team as well to go and identify the idle resources and then take some actions. Everything was automated. And the intelligent rules were able to detect anti-patterns. We were able to take actions early and quick. So accountability increased with different teams. The budget utilization increased. The overall cloud utilization was much better with all these things. Now, at the end, let's summarize, right, that you would be working on different cloud projects, right? But there are some best practices that applies to almost every cloud project. If we follow these best practices, we would be able to save almost 10, 20, 30% of the. Now, make cost management as in the initial discussions, bring that down, right? We want to consider cost right from the development phase. We don't want to leave it behind. What kind of resources, what kind of services, how do we want to host the services? Everything should be discussed early in the development cycle. Make teams accountable, charge back the teams, have proper tagging of resources. Now, with infra as a structure as a code, that is pretty easy, right? Once we define a policy, everything has to be implemented. Otherwise, we can even decline any launching of the cloud resource. We have to rely on automation as well. With hundreds or thousands of resources, hundreds of accounts, it becomes very difficult to manually monitor what's going on. That's where the automated monitoring of resources, the automated analysis of utilization is very important. Using appropriate storage classes, if everything and every data is not required at the same time, depending on that, we can use tiered storage and save the cost. We need to use each and every cloud provider provides discount mechanisms. There are reserved instances, there are spot instances, there is preemptive instances, we have savings plan. So depending on the usage, depending on the commitment, depending on the plan, we need to go for some of these mechanisms that can help us achieve almost 50 to 60% of the cost. And then any actions we can take. How do we, usage is different across different projects. So your patterns would be different. You would have to identify the patterns and create certain anomaly rules that can help you. For some of the team, weekends are very less activity. For some of the teams where there is huge data migration happening, data ingestion happening, weekends, there is hundreds and thousands of GBs of data that gets ingested. So depending on that, we need to come up with our own mechanism that, okay, what's the peak hours? What are the off-peak hours? Now can we move from a scaled up capacity to a scaled down? So that's pretty much. I hope this session helped. And if there are any questions, feel free to write to me. But I'm sure if we start following some of the practices we talked about, that will definitely help you in managing the cost and reducing the overall bills for your cost. Thanks and have a good day, everyone.